Alright, speaking of that video game Skullgirls, do you know who made it?
Not sure. Wasn't it like a Double Helix or something like that, or or Iron Galaxy? I think that made it.
Sounds right to me. I believe it was 1-2 Game Studios that was later bought out by Iron Galaxy. I think that's how it worked.
All right, well, so let's bring on our esteemed... I was going to make another joke, but I'm not going to. I'm just going to bring on Mr. Mike Z. How are you doing? You may talk to everybody and say hi and do whatever you want.
All right, and my hand stopped phasing into another dimension. Hello.
Oh, it's going somewhere.
Yeah, because if I do this, it's just, like, invisible, right? So...
Is it invisible or indivisible?
I gotta go.
Oh, okay.
Hey, look! I've seen your Twitter, Mike. You're not allowed. You are not allowed to get mad at a pun, okay?
Oh, but the aim is that reaction where people are like, I want to be anywhere other than listening to this sentence right now.
Yeah, that's actually true. Yeah. That's true.
Yeah, if it doesn't make you reevaluate your life choices, then it wasn't a good enough pun.
That's true. That's the way it works.
Own man.
So,
right.
We wanted to have you on here because sort of most recently you have made some changes to Skullgirls, and we wanted to chat about that, but also wanted to chat about online play in general. But yeah, at the beginning...
And it's a slow news day. Yeah.
And there's nothing else going on.
We were desperate for somebody.
Yep.
Everybody else said no. No, I'm just kidding.
Yes, I'm actually sitting on the bottom of the barrel right here.
I believe it. So I guess let's start by talking about Skullgirls and what has changed about it recently.
All right. So recently I had to go back and be able to build Skullgirls again because we're making the mysterious character for Skullgirls Mobile. And I had to build that in the old Skullgirls engine because the Indivisible engine is so different that it wouldn't have carried over to mobile at all if we'd built them otherwise. Yeah, even gender-neutral pronouns. That's right. No spoilers whatsoever.
Dang. Okay, look at you with all your practice.
That's right. Oh, I have my list over here of like things not to say. It's not Lil Band, that kind of thing.
Nice.
Anyway, so I had to make Skullgirls work again, and as part of that, one of the people that works on Skullgirls Mobile came back and told me about something that they'd done. I don't know if they want to be credited or not, but it was Liam, so there. That they'd done on Skullgirls Mobile, which was really smart, which is the way GGPO works. And actually, this is that bug that Street Fighter V had. Don't know if it still has it. Don't know if they actually fixed it or not. But the one-sided rollbacks thing, right, is because when two games are running, oh, you know what? I'm going to get rid of my background so that I can use my hands. Is that even possible to do? Can I actually just turn this off? Does that work at all?
I think so. You turned it on.
How many developers does it take?
You wish.
Okay.
How many developers does it take to... No, I was kidding.
Hey.
All right. How many developers does it take to figure out XSplit VCamp? Yeah, okay. So when you have two games running, they're running, time is advancing, right? I'm on frame 10, I'm on frame 11, I'm on frame 12, I'm on frame 13. The games don't always run at the same speed because if, for example, if I have a really good computer, my game can run faster than yours and have to, like, hold itself to a frame rate, or if we're both on VSync, but my monitor's at 60 and your monitor's at 59.94 or whatever it is. Or even if we're on the exact same game console, like a PS4, if the operating system interrupts one of our games at some point and doesn't interrupt the other one, they end up running at slightly different speeds. Right. So what happens is someone's game ends up slightly ahead in time of the other person's game. And in that event, there's supposed to be a thing that tells the game that's ahead to wait until the other person's game is caught up, and then they both continue at the same amount of time, right? Because when you're ahead, what happens is, so if I'm on like frame 20 and you think you're on frame 15, then when I get an input from you, it's always from the past, right? Yes. So my game has to roll back every time it gets an input from you, even though it's the current input. And your game, when it gets an input from me, gets it from the future. So if the game's good enough to not just throw that input out because it hasn't gotten there yet, this one never has to roll back, right? Street Fighter V's bug was that it wasn't properly syncing the games back up.
Right.
So one game would end up ahead and one game would end up behind, and it was usually the person with the better computer or the computer versus the PS4 that would end up ahead. So it was really funny because even from launch day, you would see people be like, this game is perfect and I've never had a single rollback. And other people are like, every match that I play has a ton of rollbacks and I don't know why. And it was usually the people with the good computers that were complaining about all their rollbacks and the people with worse computers or worse internet connections that weren't, because the good computers ended up ahead. So anyway, so when you get to a situation like this, what happens is, since you can't make this game run faster, because that'd be very weird, and also because the game may not run faster, the game that's ahead has to say, okay, well, I'm going to wait for this one to catch up. Right. So assuming that that is properly implemented, the default way that GGPO does it is by just having this game sleep, which is computer terminology for do absolutely nothing.
Yes.
Right? It's the technical term. I don't know if people have heard it before.
I have.
But okay, so you sleep. So what that means is, if this game's like 3 frames ahead of the other one when it checks, that means it will stop for 3 whole frames and do nothing. Mm-hmm. Right? No inputs, no processing, no nothing. Which does serve the intended purpose of syncing the 2 games up, but also means that you experience a point at which your input can get dropped or anything else can happen badly because the game's doing nothing. Right? So okay. That's actually in the demonstration or the like template implementation for GGPO is when you receive this message, sleep, right? So the idea from Skullgirls Mobile was, since Skullgirls runs on turbo, which means every so often it just doesn't draw one of the frames and then continues, so it actually runs at faster than 60. When GGPO tells you you're 3 frames ahead, instead of sleeping, just keep a counter and then skip doing the turbo speed for that many frames you would drop.
Right. Okay.
Right. So you effectively run 1 frame slower in that instance, but the game's still running.
Right. So basically, instead of
it's not sleeping, it's just a little slower for that period of time.
Right.
The equivalent for Skullgirls is it goes from running 72 frames a second to running at 68 frames a second. The equivalent for like a normal game would be it goes from running at 60 to running at about 56. Because we did a bunch of empirical testing and it turns out that dropping every skipped frame was really bad, so we made it every other, which is basically an extra frame every 14. So what happens is your game still runs at the same basic speed because like the really useful part of this is like if you look at like Marvel 2 in the arcade, that had huge slowdown all the time when stuff was going on screen and people could still play it fine. Right? Which means a little bit of slowdown that people don't really notice makes almost no difference. And you can do extra things like try and put that frame when there is a hit stop happening for the point characters, so you wouldn't be able to do anything anyway, and we did some of that.
Interesting.
GGPO, actually, if you want to talk about clever stuff, GGPO's initial implementation won't tell you to sleep while someone is entering a motion. It waits for the input to be the same for 10 frames before it'll even tell the game that it wants you to sleep if you're ahead.
So it just won't interrupt. So that way it won't interrupt any inputs, basically. It won't actually kill any inputs.
Yep. So the cool bit about this is we can throw that out entirely, right? Because it can tell you to sleep all the time, very frequently, and you're not actually going to sleep. You're just going to keep track of how many frames you want to not skip.
Because the whole thing about it is, before, when you sleep it literally is not processing anything. And it was probably a little bit harder to just make it so that it still process things without moving, because then you're getting multiple inputs in 1 frame. How do you handle that kind of situation?
Yep.
But if you slow
Games don't even handle that properly when they're running at 60 frames a second. Look at all the bugs where you could hold the 3-kick macro and do something else with Balrog, right? Input processing is difficult enough as it is, that doing something like that is prohibitively time-consuming.
Right. And another thing, too, is that Skullgirls, if I'm not mistaken, already has... and I'm still blown away by how this works, because even as a programmer, I still don't really process it. But your game runs at, a specific frame rate, but then outputs it in a different frame rate, and even if they don't match, you still can figure out what's supposed to happen or something like that?
Oh, you're just talking about processing inputs on the skipped frames, I think.
Yeah.
Either that or triple buffering. But
yeah.
So basically, like old Capcom games, when you run them at turbo, like ST, right? The way that works is it shows you frame 1, it shows you frame 2, it shows you frame 3. It runs frame 4 but doesn't show it to you and doesn't process any input. And then it runs frame 5 and shows that to you, right? And actually, in ST's case, I think it's like show frame 1 and 2, skip 3, show 4 and 5, skip 6. Like Turbo 3 is like ridiculous.
Yeah.
But what that means is those frames where the game updates itself but doesn't process any input and doesn't render anything happen like instantaneously, right? But there wasn't any input given on that frame. So for example, if something was about to hit you and you attempted to block, it would be not blockable, right? Like if Marvel 2 has a bunch of these, this comes up because of the way that Capcom implemented how you have to block, which is you have to be in pre-block before you can actually block. So if the skipped frame is the one where you holding back would put you into pre-block, then you just can't block the next thing. SG doesn't have that problem because you can block during any action, but that's a whole separate, like, that's a bunch of bugs interacting to be a problem all at once. But the point is, Skullgirls just does exactly that, except on the frame that we don't show you, we still read inputs.
Gotcha.
Right? So it's just pull the joystick again, which means there's no frame that goes by where you can't provide input to your character. There's a smaller window, but we have at least a 2-frame buffer on almost everything.
Right. Okay. Gotcha.
So the really cool bit about that one idea is all the rest of the stuff that it led to. So now the game doesn't have to sleep when it's trying to let the opponent catch up, which means you can check very much more often whether you're ahead or not, right? Because the way that GGPO works is you set a threshold for like how much ahead am I allowed to be before it will tell me to sleep, and also how often will it check to see whether I'm ahead. So the default is like every 4 seconds or something, it checks to see if you're ahead, and you have to be more than I think 4 frames, might be 5 frames, but ahead of the other person before it tells you to sleep. So the problem with that is, if you're 4 frames ahead, not 5, it won't tell you to sleep, right? But what that means is every frame you're getting 4 frames worth of rollbacks when you get the input from the other person. So what not having to sleep let us do is check much more often and make that threshold of how far ahead you have to be nothing. Right?
So you check so frequently. You check so frequently that threshold is essentially useless now.
Oh well, we made because you could still make the threshold 4, and it would just not tell you to drop any frames, right? Until you were 4 frames ahead of them. But we made the threshold 1, and we have it check every like 70 frames or something, which means you keep yourself in sync much more often, which means you experience the little mini rollbacks that happen all the time way less.
Right.
And that was the thing that made the giant difference to everything. And it was such a difference that our other programmer lives in England. He's awake when I'm awake at like 2 in the morning. So I did this at like 2 a.m. and I tested it with him. And it was so good that we both played one game and then we messaged each other immediately and we're like, it can't be that much better. We have to go back and try the old one. Like, it was everything you ever wanted out of online, and I actually can't overstate what a huge difference that made. Like, it went from playing against someone at 205 ping being, God, I really hate playing this game online and getting mad at playing the game online, to playing someone at 205 ping and getting mad that it's 2 in the morning and I can't play the game.
Well,
right? Like, I was legitimately like, damn, I really need to practice this.
I mean, what's crazy about that, though, is that, you know, Skullgirls has always been kind of the paragon of netcode, right? One of the best examples. That and Killer Instinct, I feel like, have always been the biggest examples. And yet, you found a way to make it even better. I mean, obviously, useless question, but that surprised even you, right? That it could get that much better.
I mean, okay, so full disclosure, I was an idiot when I worked on Skullgirls in a lot of ways, and one of them was I didn't know anything about netcode or how to write frame skip code, right? Not frame skip like skipping every other frame to make it go faster, but frame skip as like throttle it so it only runs at 60 even if your computer could run it at 500.
Okay.
So one of the other things that I fixed after that was actually the way that my frame skip code worked. was interacting with GGPO telling you to slow down extremely badly. To the point where GGPO would tell you you need to be 3 frames slower, and it would be 3 frames slower, and then it would be like, oh, I'm 3 frames behind, and skip 3 frames and try to catch up. So that was my own dumbness, and I'm fairly sure that the people that worked on KI, because I worked with most of them, didn't have that problem. So KI probably didn't start with that handicap. Yeah, those guys were smarter than I was when I worked on the initial implementation of SG. But that was the other thing that massively improved basically everything about online. So like it was surprising enough that for about 2 weeks I was convinced I had screwed something up and people were just getting desyncs or whatever and not noticing, and that there had to be something gigantically wrong. But there really isn't. So last week I ended up changing the recommended delay for the ping time to basically 0 all the time, unless your ping's like 150 or higher. And your like the green and yellow and red colors for ping is now like, I think it's like 150 is yellow and below that is green, because it really works that well.
Wow.
And I again, I don't take any credit for the fact that it works that well, because the actual thing that's working well is GGPO.
Yeah.
Right. But you can apply this to any game, not just SG, and it doesn't have to have turbo. That's the thing. So effectively what Skullgirls is doing is sleeping for 1/14 of a frame every frame in order to catch up, or in order to let them catch up. So the way that you would do that in another game is change it from thinking it needs to run at 60 to thinking it needs to run at 56 or 57 until the other game is caught up. You can apply that to anything, because realistically the players won't notice. You could even do, the naive version would be every 14 frames sleep for a frame, which is probably not going to make much difference, but you should still sample inputs. But if your game is just DT based, like if it just says how long is a frame, okay, I need to wait until this time is gone by, then you can just make that slightly longer until the other game is caught up and you're all set.
And like you said, DT base was dynamic time.
Oh, delta time. Sorry.
Delta
so there are
times,
two ways to write your game engine. One is based on number of frames, which is just every time the update function happens, you assume it's been 1 frame and everything goes by in 1 frame. Yeah. That's how Skullgirls works. A lot of the modern engines like Unity or Unreal base it on delta time, which is basically they tell your update function how long it's been since the last time. Right. So if your game runs at 400 frames a second, then your update gets a thing that says it's been 1/400th of a second. And if your game runs at 2 frames a second, your update thing gets something that says it's been half a second. And like you can move objects longer distances in the world and whatever. And it's actually a terrible idea to do that for a fighting game. But if you want to make a fighting game in those engines, what you end up doing is your update function adds up all the time that it's given until it gets to 1/60th of a second. Then it updates for a frame and then keeps the remainder and then goes on. Anyway.
I mean, like as a programmer, for me, like I just have tons of questions about that. But
please ask them.
You know, cool. I mean, like, for example,
I'll nod my head.
Day, right?
Like if you have like 400 frames in 1 frame, or 400 DTs in 1 frame. Like, how do you process if each of those reads a different input, like you were holding down and then not holding down? Do you always just take the last one on the input, you know?
Right. So this is the first-person shooter versus fighting game thing.
Okay.
There's a video up by someone who tested running, I want to say one of the Call of Duties, but please don't kill me. I don't play FPSs because the last one I really liked was Half-Life 1. But they put up a video where it was, my aiming is much worse in standard or in widescreen than it is in standard resolution, and it turned out to be because their game updated faster in standard resolution. So, yes, in answer to your question, in a DT-based engine, if you are doing something like mouse aiming, right, your FPS can make a huge difference.
Yeah,
because if you're trying to move your mouse like this far, and your game is updating at 400 frames a second, if you move your mouse a tiny little bit, and it's a gaming mouse and can detect that, right, then your aim will move this much. If next frame you stop moving it, your aim won't move any more than that. Right. If you're running at 30 frames a second, the time interval that the game thinks went by is much bigger. So smaller mouse movements will get lumped together into one 30th of a second mouse movement, if that makes any sense.
Yeah. No, it does. It does.
And objects move further, right? So like the easy way to think about DT is, let's say someone is walking at like a meter a second, right? If your game runs at 60 frames a second, then they are 1/60th of a meter further every time you get a chance to shoot at them, for example. Right. But if the game runs at 400 frames a second, they're 1/400th of a meter further every time you get a chance to shoot at them. So you have the ability to take a much more accurate shot. That makes sense?
Yeah. Okay.
Right? So in a fighting game, the way that you do this is, instead of updating things at 1/400th, you add up the 400ths and do nothing until you get to a 60th, and then you move them 1/60th. Right? That's how you do frame-based stuff in a DT-based engine. But the downside of that is, if you have a delta time that's like half a second, then you have to be like, okay, that was 30 frames, and then you run 30 frames worth of the game. Right? So if you have a DT that's longer than a 60th of a second, you actually have to run more than one update.
Right.
And that's where things start kind of sucking.
I mean,
in a frame-based game, you would slow it down. In a DT-based game, you can decide to slow it down, but you generally don't want to.
Okay. But I mean, nobody would ever do that, right?
Which part?
The DT being over 1/60th frames of a second, right? So
depends on whatever else happens in your computer.
Okay.
Right? Or it depends on if you're waiting for network input. It depends on when you get something from the network.
I see what you're saying. Gotcha. Because sometimes it's not.
Yeah, it's never intended, but it's
right.
You can. For example, if someone wants to run it at 30, they might have the problem where the person moves twice as far every update. Right.
Okay. Gotcha.
So sorry, that was a non-fighting game related distraction.
No,
but yeah, I actually really enjoy netcode stuff.
Yeah, because the interesting thing about that is that, as a person who hasn't done game programming before, this is really fascinating for me, because now I'm starting to understand now how much that, your game is kind of at the mercy of the person's monitor refresh rate, at the mercy of what they're running their image. You actually don't have a lot of control over a lot of that, and it's not just like, hey, I'm giving you this many images and the monitor's going to figure it out. No, the monitor tells you you're a slave to the refresh rate that the user has chosen, essentially.
That depends on single, double, or triple buffered. Okay, really fast explanation of how this works. So you know how screen tearing looks, right? Everybody's seen screen tearing before, where you see like half of one frame and then half of another one, and like the dude's leg is over here and then his top half is over here, right? Mm-hmm. So if you don't care about screen tearing, you can run at whatever speed you want and everything is great. If you do care about screen tearing, you have to wait until the monitor decides to start the next frame, which is every refresh rate, right? So if your monitor refreshes at 60, then it's 60. If your monitor is set to 144, then it's at minimum 144. But if you do triple buffering, so double buffering doesn't actually save you from being tied to the refresh rate. Double buffering is you have two screens, right? Mm-hmm. This is the one that people are seeing, and this is the one that you're drawing to.
Yes.
And then whenever the monitor's flip comes up, you switch which one is which. So now the people are seeing this one, and you're drawing to this one, right? But you still have to flip it at the time when the monitor is not doing anything else, or you get screen tearing.
Okay.
So you're still tied to refresh rate, but the thing is you have a longer amount of time to draw in. Mm-hmm. Triple buffering, which is what most modern games use, and what Skullgirls uses, is you actually have... I don't have enough hands for this. Let's assume this one's divided in half. So you actually have 3 buffers.
I've got a hand up here.
And what happens is, this is the one people are seeing, this is the one you're drawing to, and this is the extra one that's available. And then when you're done drawing for this frame, you switch these two. Mm-hmm. So you always have a fully drawn one and a drawn one in progress, so that whenever the monitor decides to flip itself, there's always something that's completely done for it to flip with. Right?
Gotcha.
But you can do this as much as you want, and it doesn't have anything to do with what the monitor is showing or the refresh rate of your screen.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
See? Yeah, I feel like I totally understood that. I wouldn't know how to program it at all.
Yeah. I mean,
I get the explanation.
I don't know how to program that either. You tell DirectX I want triple buffering, and it says, okay, boss.
Do you want triple buffering? Yes. Okay.
Yes. The basic upside of doing something like that is then if your game happens to run at like 48 frames a second for a while, you still won't get screen tearing, but you're not dropped immediately down to 30.
Right. Okay.
Right.
And
so a lot of modern games don't actually care about your refresh rate. They will care about that in terms of they want to update the full screen every time. So like if your game can run at 400 and it's not triple buffered, you'll get better performance. But in a lot of cases, I don't know what Call of Duty does, because the other thing with triple buffering is every buffer is a full screen's worth of data, right?
Right.
One of my favorite facts that I'm not actually sure is true anymore, but used to be true, is how many fewer screens of data memory holds than it used to. So if you look at the Super Nintendo, right, that was a 320 by 200-ish, or 640 by 480 if you want to be wrong about it.
Yeah.
A screen, but it was 8 bits of data, and the Super Nintendo had a small amount of megabytes of RAM, but that mapped to a whole bunch of screens fit in the memory on a Super Nintendo, because there wasn't very much data per screen compared to the amount of memory, right?
Okay.
If you move to like a PS3, which could output 1080p at 24 or 32 bits per pixel, that's a screen is now a huge amount of memory, because it's a much bigger array, and each of them is 4 bytes. Each pixel is 4 bytes, but the amount of memory that you had didn't go up by that same factor. So on a PS3, I'm actually going to do the math for this because I'm really interested and it's very fast. So 1080 times 1920 times 4 is 8 megabytes per screen.
Right.
So if you take 512 divided by that, you could hold... You could hold 62 screens worth of data in the entire memory of the PS3, and that was way less than the Super Nintendo got.
Right.
Right, and you had to move all that data every time. But so the deal is, if you do triple buffering, you have to have 3 times that amount of memory available for 3 screens worth of stuff to be kept, which means you don't get to use that memory for a bunch of other stuff. And since that's not an insignificant amount of memory anymore, and you can also have a shadow buffer that's associated with each one, and a stencil buffer and whatever else, lots of companies opt not to do that because they want to have the extra memory available.
I mean,
that's why. Sorry.
No.
Last sentence, I promise. That's why on like the PS4, when you went to 8 gigs of RAM, but you didn't appreciably increase the screen size, it finally felt like we're back to freedom and we don't have to care about how much memory the graphic stuff is taking up. Okay, go ahead.
No, it's crazy to me because, all of these companies, all they try to do is like, oh, now we're going to do 4K and blah, blah, blah. And people wonder why, like, games are so hard to make these days compared to how it was before, by making these new requirements. I mean, I've talked about it with like Derek Daniels and all these other guys on Twitter and everything. Games these days, they're just so much more expensive to make. And it's so much hard, and I feel like we've lost the A-level titles. We have triple A's, we have indie, and nothing in between, because even by the time you get to the in-between, you're using so much resources and doing so much stuff, it might as well be a triple A title, and you might as well put the extra money into it, or take it away and turn it into an indie one. It's like that middle ground has no home anymore, it feels like.
Yeah. So the interesting part about game dev now, and we've gotten far away from networking, so I can go back to that in a second.
No problem.
The interesting part about game dev now is the actual design part hasn't changed all that much. If you look at the insides, like ignoring animating the character in 3D, right? If you look at the insides of Street Fighter V or Street Fighter 4 versus Street Fighter 2, it's still just, there are some boxes here. Do they overlap or not? Okay, they do. Go to a different character state. Process some input from the joystick. Like, that stuff is basically unchanged.
I mean,
right?
what MK is still using the MK2 engine, right? I mean, like, basically.
Are they?
Something like, I heard like MK9 was built off of the MK2 engine. Like, they went backwards and started from MK2 and went from there and updated that.
I could buy that.
Yeah.
Dang.
So,
I mean, the thing is, a lot of that stuff is not really all that complicated, right? Like, there isn't all that much to a fighting game. There are, I mean, the stuff that the Skullgirls engine does that's not in script is like, okay, you gave me a bunch of boxes that are over here. Your boxes overlap their boxes. Okay, tell you that they overlapped, and like, everything else comes from script. Like, there isn't a whole bunch inside of a fighting game engine, especially a 2D one, a 3D one, if they have to do 3D collisions or you actually want to collide like rotated boxes or whatever, that's slightly harder. That's why like Marvel 3 and Smash use spheres, because the sphere collision test is really easy to write.
Yeah.
Okay.
But like, yeah, well, a sphere collision test is like, are the two centers closer than the distance the two radii make?
Right.
And like they collide, right? And that's why you have capsules, which are like Tylenol pills, like foot dive, because it's a sweat sphere. It's a sphere test, but you also care about distance from a line segment, and like those are both really easy pieces of math to do.
Because as opposed to 3D boxes where you have to know where, if you're going to one of the corners, then it's a further distance, and if you're going to the center, it's going to be a shorter distance, things like that.
2D boxes are extremely easy. 3D boxes are the second most complicated type of thing you can do.
Okay.
As compared to like arbitrary polygonal surface.
Right.
But yeah. Anyway, so like the insides of the game itself are not all that different now than they were 10 years ago or even 20 years ago. I mean, there's some stuff that Battletoads does that like modern beat 'em ups don't do any better. But what got more complicated is the art and the rendering and the amount of assets you need for both of those things, right? Like you have to generate a very high resolution screen. People care about how shadows work. Like there's a huge amount more that goes into the graphics and the sound, I guess I should point out.
I remember,
everybody forgets sound.
I remember a tweet from you a long time ago that when Big Band first got added to the game, that you did a test with like 2 teams of like 3 big bands just to see how it was handled, and it worked fine, right? But you know, that's
and it was very surprising.
Yeah, and that's one of those things that, a lot of people don't I mean, one of the reasons why MVC2 has such bad animation is because it had to put 6 characters into memory all at once to pull them out, at any time.
Right.
And so
one of the things that they definitely had to do in Marvel 2 is chop frames out of characters.
Oh yeah. Like you look at
to fit them at all. If you look at Sentinel in Children of the Atom, he's beautiful.
God.
He has all these in-between frames on everything. He has down roundhouse, which is a move I'm really thankful he didn't have in Marvel 2. The
Dude,
buzzsaw.
Spirals,
right? He has
Spiral's Metamorphosis Super is like night and day between MVC2 and Children of the Atom. Dude, it's ridiculous. Colossus, when he grabs you and spins you, like it literally just flips it back and forth. It's the ugliest thing in MVC2, but
but they couldn't have put it in if they didn't do that, right?
Yeah.
They had a strict memory budget for each character. If you actually look at the data files for Children of the Atom, Sentinel has 3 whole character data files just for Sentinel, whereas like Wolverine has 1, right?
Dude, I mean, the reason why I brought it up is just because, like you said, because the graphics are getting bigger, the resolution's getting stronger, that, having a game like Skullgirls with 6 characters in memory all at once is a lot more expensive than it used to be. And even when you go back to when it was cheaper in MVC2, it was still so expensive that they had to make the game look kind of hideous. I remember when MVC2 first came out, I cried over how bad a lot of the Children of the Atom characters looked. They were gross. They were terrible. Nowadays, nobody notices it anymore because we're used to that version. But man, I mean, Children of the Atom is still one of the most like beautifully animated fighting games out there in existence, in my opinion.
There is something to point out, though, is that if you look at Marvel 2, look at the characters they made specifically for it, right? Look at Cable, Ruby Heart, Tron, Hayato. They are actually some of the best sprite animation Capcom has ever done.
Oh, okay.
Right? If you look at like Cable standing roundhouse, that move that everybody remembers, that move is 7 frames of animation. Okay, it's incredible. An equivalent move in Children of the Atom or Marvel Superheroes would have been 14 or 15. But because they knew that they needed economy, they animated differently. They spaced the frames differently. They made a whole bunch of different choices than they would have if they just could throw frames at it. And as a result, you have something that looks comparable to Marvel Superheroes, but takes up half the amount of space.
Gotcha.
So, like, Marvel 2 is actually, like, the characters that they made for that game is actually a masterclass in how to animate economically.
Yeah. Okay.
Sorry.
That's awesome. No,
I think that's
super cool. I mean, look,
As far as
No, go ahead, David.
Go ahead.
I was about to cut it off What were you gonna say?
No, I mean, it's just like, I was about to say that this is dangerous because, like, seriously, I can sit here. I mean, I've talked to Mike Z outside of, just like on airplanes or whatever like that, I've told him a long time ago I've wanted to write my own fighting game engine. And I was, obviously I don't know anything about game programming, so it probably would not work the way that I would expect it to. But, it was one of those discussions that I talked to Mike about, and he was always like, I'd be curious to hear your kind of ideas, and I want to know what he did for Skullgirls and everything like that, just how to make it work and everything. And I don't know, it's the programmer in me, the person who got into programming because I wanted to make video games. Then it turned out that the video game industry sucked, so I kind of stayed away from it. But I swear I could talk to Mike about this forever, dude.
I mean, we can stop talking about that part, but like, you ought to start, right? The only difference between you and me when I started is that I started and you didn't.
Right.
I didn't know anything about games either.
Yeah, I mean, to be honest with you, I've actually told people on my stream before that one of the stream ideas I want to do is just doing a Unity stream. I was just going to learn Unity. Unity right now, because of the quarantining, there's like the whole beginning chunk of lessons are free on Unity's website. And because they're free, I figured I could stream myself learning it. And then, maybe think about doing something. And in fact, one of the topics that I did want to talk about later on was a guy named Born to SPD has made his own hack of Super Turbo. And I have considered trying to learn how to do that myself. Obviously, it's not the same thing. You're just tweaking binaries and things like that, and interpreting the file. You're not actually coding the game, so I don't have the access to do a lot of the things that I'd want to do. But my brain for this quarantine, like, I've just been thinking about all sorts of ways to like maybe get into programming and stuff. So,
I mean, you should start. Like,
I think
I
you
tell
should start
everybody
too,
this,
I'll be
but if you
honest,
want to, like, give it a shot. You won't learn anything by doing nothing.
Yeah, of course,
Sounds right to me. I think you should do it too.
Yeah, I mean, the hard part.
Go ahead, cut us off.
Yeah.
No, I'm being serious about that. I've been telling James I think you should be doing other stuff as well. For a while now.
The hardest part, obviously, right now is just the mental stability during quarantine. But yeah, it's.
I love this, so I'm not the right person to say that to.
Wait, are you really going to do a
U.S.
an
and Japan?
exhibition between Japan and the U.S.? What's going on?
Yeah.
That's awesome.
Yes. So the last one we did worked okay, but this one is going to be even better. I mean, okay, that was a good segue, David. I sincerely appreciate your skills. The improvement in the net play, like, I actually can't overstate how good it is. I mean, I played England at 205. I played Brazil at 220 something. And like, yes, occasionally there will be the giant rollback that's caused by 205 milliseconds of delay.
Yeah.
But you can pick, oh yeah, this is definitely the thing that I should talk about. You can pick delay 0 and play somebody on another continent and not care. Right? The whole point of rollbacks is that you can choose the delay you feel on your own actions, right? So on delay-based netcode, this is like the did you plug it in version of how stuff works, but on delay-based netcode, if we have 10 frames of delay between us, right? So if you don't hear me speaking, which is probably preferable for you, for 10 frames after I've said anything, the way delay-based netcode works is it puts that same delay on both people, right? So if my game isn't getting your inputs until 10 frames late, then my game holds on to my inputs and gives them to the game 10 frames late. That way, both of our inputs arrive at the same time. This is extremely simple to write, which is why everybody wrote it initially. It doesn't require you to change the game engine in any way. You just run it normally. You just have a list of inputs over here, and it reads from the bottom, and it puts new inputs into the top. And that's it. And if the other person's input is later than 10 frames, then the game just waits until it shows up. That's why delay-based netcode is in everything, because it's easy, but that's also why delay-based netcode is complete garbage.
Right.
Sorry.
So just as a means of making sure that people at home understand this, that's why. So basically, if you hit a button at what you see on your screen, because it knows that because it needs to delay 10 frames, your actual action won't come out until 10 frames later. I'm not sure who's catching up to who in that situation, but someone has to catch up to the other person, and so that's why.
No one's catching up. That's the whole point.
Right. Well, I mean, I don't know who's ahead of the other. I don't know if your frames are delayed, that means you're ahead, or if you're behind.
On delay-based netcode, there's no syncing involved.
Right.
Because your game doesn't advance until it's received the input from 10 frames ago. So you're both internet lag behind reality, if that makes any sense. But the important part about delay-based netcode is, okay, so two things. First of all, in a fighting game, I'm reacting to what I see, right?
Right.
So let's say delay-based netcode works like this. Let's give it the third strike input delay from Dreamcast, okay, which was 4 extra frames over what third strike in the arcade was. I think it was from 4 to 8, right? Everybody thought that was terrible and never wanted to play on Dreamcast, okay? Now, the reason for that is the same reason why delay-based netcode is extra horrible, and it's this. I'm not reacting to your inputs. I'm reacting to your character, right? So let's assume everybody has perfect reaction time, and we don't take the extra 12 frames of human reaction time that's in there. So if you push your character's attack button on frame 10, right? But I should have picked a different number than 10. Let's go with 12 because it's not 10. So you push your button on frame 12, right? We have 4 frames of delay between us. That means your button actually starts happening on frame 16 on both of our screens, right? Then on frame 16, I push my button to react to your action that I magically just saw.
Yeah.
And my button doesn't come out until frame 20.
Yep.
Right? So there's actually double the amount of delay that you would think from learning how to play on a delay-based game. And if you want to know the extra reason, even for things that are guaranteed, right? So let's say you are blocking Chun-Li's Super 2 in Third Strike, and you want to parry the last hit, right? That Super is a guaranteed sequence. It takes the same amount of time no matter what. So you block all of it, and then you just parry the last hit when it comes up. If you're in delay-based netcode, that parry is still delayed. So you actually have to parry that 4 frames or however many frames early, even though the action is the same amount of time and you know exactly when you should do it offline.
Right.
Make sense?
Yeah. I mean,
that's the example that I use.
Experience as well.
Yep. That's the example that I use for everything. Okay, so that's why rollbacks matter.
Yeah. I mean, that's
if you ignore everything else about how rollbacks work, what rollbacks let you do is choose to experience no delay on your own inputs versus what you see on the screen.
Right.
So if you're blocking Chun's Super 2 and then you go to parry the last hit, you parry it with the same timing that you would offline.
By looking at it.
By looking at what's on the screen. And that's what makes rollbacks and online play useful for practice, for learning, and comparable to offline play. That is the whole thing that makes all the difference.
Yeah, I mean, fighting games...
Rollbacks allow you to choose your own delay, okay? And the way they do that, this is the slightly more technical bit, but so the way rollbacks work is this. Your inputs are still late, right? Your inputs take 10 frames or whatever to arrive to my game. My game says, I don't care. I'm going to continue anyway and guess that you did the exact same thing you did last frame. So I'm going to predict 10 frames into the future, right, to now, and allow my player to do whatever they want in real time. And then when your input from 10 frames ago arrives, I'm going to roll back, that's why it's called that, to the state 10 frames ago, put that input in, and then predict forward to now again from that altered past, right? It's the Doc Brown, when the timeline skewed into an alternate 1985. So now you're in the alternate version of that past, and you've seen the action updated to what they did 10 frames ago.
Right.
Right? But so if they do something that is delayed by the internet or very, very obviously unpredictable, or for example, if they block something at like the last possible second, then on your screen, they're not yet hitting back when you touch them, so you will see the beginning of a hit spark, and then their input from 10 frames ago will arrive, and it'll be back, so the game will decide, oh, they were actually trying to block in the past, right? And then roll to the now, and say, okay, well, they were blocking. So that's what you get when you see a rollback.
Yeah.
Is the past changed and the present didn't. But the difference is the present, you can provide an input on frame 10 and it'll happen on frame 10 instead of having to be delayed by however bad the internet connection is. Right. So you basically take all the delay and you move it from the controls, which are not visible on the screen, to the visuals. Right? Yep. So now the controls respond right away, but the visuals have to correct themselves if something different happened.
Yeah.
That's basically what you're doing, is you're choosing where you want to put that delay. And you can, with GGPO, you can actually choose to put it in the middle, right? You can say, I want to play with 2 frames of input delay, which will reduce any rollbacks that you're going to have by 2 frames, but I will experience some amount of rollbacks. Or if you really don't care about that, you can actually make rollback netcode equivalent to delay netcode by just choosing a high delay.
Right.
If I choose 10 frames of delay on my rollback game, I now play with 10 frames of input delay, but the screen looks fine.
Yeah.
Right? So they're actually fully equivalent. I mean, you shouldn't choose to do that, right? Like the whole point of having rollbacks is that you can just always pick 0 delay.
I mean,
or 1 if you really want to care about that kind of thing. But you can play as if it's offline. You can do combos, you can do punishes, you can do things related to the screen as if you were playing offline. And that's what makes all the difference.
Yeah. I mean,
and that's why I've been screaming about this for 10 years.
What's the feedback from the community?
The initial feedback from the community, because I screwed something up, was this is terrible. And then once I hadn't screwed up the frame throttling code, everybody really enjoys it. Like the feedback from everybody has been like, I've played people all over the world and it basically doesn't matter where they are. So the community was the one that organized the US versus Japan, right? They played matches on the new netcode, and then they were like, we can do this again, and now we can't complain about it.
Pretty sweet.
Yeah.
So it's nice work. I know it'll sell copies of Skullgirls if more people buy Skullgirls. I don't actually care anymore because the amount of money that we make off of it is non-existent now. But you should try it, because you will be surprised at the amount of difference that having good netcode can make. You basically don't have to reject any matches anymore. I mean, you still want to reject people on Wi-Fi, but that's for a different reason. Right? Even if they live next to you and they're on Wi-Fi, you generally want to reject it.
Yeah. I mean, so here's a question for you, Mike, though. Does this mean this fix that you put in here, can it be ported to everything that uses GGPO, or is it...
Oh, yes.
Yes, okay. So in other words...
it could also be ported to things that don't use GGPO.
Right. So in other words, if Crystal Dynamics... is it Crystal Dynamics? The one that did Garrow Mark the Wolves? Code Mystics. Code Mystics. Sorry. Yeah. If Code Mystics and, the Iron Galaxy and MK and NetherRealm Studios, they wanted to port this fix into their games, they could, and improve the netcode in their games as well.
Yep. Okay. And they could probably do it by watching this broadcast, because the actual what we did is really not all that hard. It's just someone had to figure out you could do it, right? It's the Columbus's egg thing.
And that was...
you know what that is.
I think it's super cool to still be coming up with ways to improve on things like this. That's awesome.
And that's credit. I mean, that credit goes to Liam, who is in the chat, correct?
Yes. Okay. The initial credit for what can be done to spark the round of improvements goes to Liam, who was very smart and thought of it the initial don't sleep part. But it's what not sleeping allows you to do with the rest of the game that's really the giant improvement, right? That was like the key that unlocks everything else that we could do to change how it deals with network delay. The other really nice part that I should say, if people are going to take this broadcast and try and do something with their own code, is before the round starts, like when inputs aren't gonna be frame perfect and nothing matters.
Yeah.
We still sleep, right?
Yeah.
It still checks to see how many frames you are ahead or behind and waits that amount of time to catch up. It only doesn't do it during gameplay because you want it to be as exact as possible when the round starts.
Right.
Right. So it checks very often and it sleeps the right amount of time before any of those inputs are going to really matter.
So, someone can, once this goes up on YouTube, link this to Zynac, please. Link this video to Zynac to make sure he gets this into Guilty Gear Strive.
So we talked just a little bit about the EVO Online thing when you raised your hand, which is hilarious. But you think that with the net code that Skullgirls has now, does it seem to you like having an online tournament would be as legit as having an offline tournament?
I'm gonna get reamed for this, but yeah, I basically think so.
Okay.
At least in terms of the gameplay. So
the
other thing, the thing that I wanted to say when you mentioned it's not the same as going to a giant venue is that it's probably beneficial for people that it's not the same as going to a giant venue because I can sit in my comfy chair.
Totally.
I can have my cat over here. I can, not be wearing pants or whatever else.
Totally. Yeah, I'm not saying it's better or worse, just that it is different.
Yeah.
It is different.
Some people find that better to be in that tournament venue. They get it up a little bit more. Some people would rather be at home where they're comfortable. It just depends on the person.
Yeah.
But it is different.
Yeah.
I mean, I'll say, having been there live, for example, during the Daigo parry and stuff like that, though that kind of crowd reaction experience is irreplaceable, is amazing.
Cool.
But at the same time, you go there, go 0-2, now you can go and play with your cat,
Well, or they tell you to go play on stage, and now you're on stage and super nervous, right?
But that's experience, and I think that's even as a person who's at flow levels of floking whenever I'm at those kind of situations, I still think it's a valuable experience and something I like having that aspect affect you as a player. Like that appeals to me, having that competitive environment. But that's me. So
I agree that it is useful experience if you have to play in an environment like that, but it will probably let people have better performances overall to not have to put them through 10 or 15 of those before they can ignore it, right?
Yeah.
So I will say two things, which are we've been running online tournaments for Skullgirls for a long time. So we've dealt with some things like two people playing one team by swapping the controller around. And you could tell because the playstyle changed, but also they won the tournament because they were both really good players, but also because you couldn't psych both of them out.
Jeez.
Right, so we did have that happen. And also there are connection issues. There will be occasional rollbacks because the internet is a wild territory and you have no idea what's going on in between your country and another country.
Right.
And between your house and someone else's house. But in terms of actually being able to play the game and execute the things that you think you want to do, if you have rollback netcode and you can play with no delay on your character, it makes a giant amount of difference. It stops being a you versus the online environment and it starts being much more you versus the other person.
I mean,
so there are the policing issues and everything else that you pointed out, right? You don't know if I'm a bot because you can't see me.
Right.
So, and you don't know if I'm two separate people or if two separate people are both me until they reach each other in bracket and can't play each other. But, you don't know any of that stuff. But in terms of the actual gameplay, it's pretty there.
I'll tell you this. For the brief moment during what David called the golden age of Street Fighter V, when we were playing on the Altamore patch, and I played online, it felt the most like I was playing and learning offline that I've really experienced, because I haven't played a lot of I haven't played a lot of KI online. I haven't played a lot of Skullgirls online. Punch Planet, them's fighting herds.
Shame.
I know.
Mike.
I mean,
James.
to be honest with you, I mean, David can attest to this.
You too.
David can attest to this as well. But in the past few years, until just recently with Street Fighter V, I haven't been playing fighting games online at all. So, you know,
I get it.
So, but
I mean, look, I played against somebody in Saudi Arabia on SF5 during the Ultimate patch, and it was legit. We were still. I blocked on reaction to moves.
Yep.
It was incredible. So no, that's great. That was remarkable because I felt it was so good for Street Fighter. But yeah, I mean, I've played on Skullgirls and on KI, and I have been playing people in Europe on KI pretty regularly.
And it looks like, you know, just to
becoming accustomed to it.
Answer Rip's question. I believe that's Rip from the Level Up Your Game. So with the new netcode improvement, is Wi-Fi okay now? No. Wi-Fi is still going to be Wi-Fi no matter what.
Okay, so I'm actually going to do like the 30-second explanation of this, because in the video that I made about why Wi-Fi sucks, I said interference. And the reason I said interference is because if you show it to your buddy who doesn't know anything about the internet, interference makes a lot of sense, right? It's not actually interference. This is like the 2-second update to that video. So the way Wi-Fi works is it's actually not talk or send and receive at the same time. So like if you're on a phone, right, you have your hang loose, your phone receiver, which has the mouthpiece and the earpiece, and there's 2 separate wires that go to the other person's mouthpiece and earpiece. So you can hear them talk and talk yourself at the same time, right? You can both drive down both sides of the highway at the same time. Okay, the way Wi-Fi works is like walkie-talkies. There's one frequency, and either I'm talking or you're talking, but not both, right? So if I want to say something to you, I have to say, hello, David, did you get the data I sent over? And then you say, yes,
nope.
I got the data you sent.
I mean, yep,
or
I did.
whatever. Right, and if we talk at the same time, nothing happens. So that's the reason Wi-Fi doesn't work. It's not actual like interference, like planes go by and they make static on your Wi-Fi. It's because the way Wi-Fi is built, and this is not fixed by Wi-Fi 6, is that it is what is called half duplex, which means only one thing can talk at a time. So your Wi-Fi can be really fast, which means when I'm allowed to talk, I'm the Micro Machines guy, right? And I say like, and you get it all, and I get high internet speeds, but I still have to wait the same amount of time while you are allowed to talk before I can talk again. So that's what happens with Wi-Fi. Instead of getting packets like this once every frame per my inputs, I get like nothing for a period of time, and then like 5 things, and then nothing for a period of time, and then 5 more things, right?
Does it need to be like that?
The short answer to that is yes, and that's why walkie-talkies work like that. If you're only using one frequency, then only one of us can transmit because the other one will stomp it if they both transmit at the same time, right? So the way to fix that for Wi-Fi would be to use 2 frequencies that are very far away from each other, one for one thing talking and the other one for the other thing talking. But even that still doesn't work as soon as you have 2 devices on the Wi-Fi. So the real answer that the way that they've been improving Wi-Fi is by making it so that you can cram more data into the amount of time you're allowed to talk, right? So you can scream a whole 3D printed N95 mask into one amount of time you're allowed to talk instead of just saying like, well, and then that's it.
Right.
But you still have to do what's called multiplexing, time multiplexing anyway, to ensure that no one is talking at the same time, right? Because if you really want to be able to do duplex, every device needs its own frequency to broadcast on so that no one is stomping anyone else, and that would be the only thing that allows everything to talk at the same time. So that's why Wi-Fi sucks. It's not actual interference, but it doesn't have anything to do with your speed, right? It only has to do with the way that Wi-Fi is built.
Okay.
So the answer to that is no, Wi-Fi is still not acceptable because Wi-Fi will still do that, and it doesn't matter how far away from you they are, that delay is generally worse than any ping time you're going to get.
Right.
Well, I really appreciate you coming on and talking about all this.
And just so people know, that Micro Machines guy, I made a reference. Nobody knew who I was talking about. John Machida, who also did the voice of Blur in Transformers the movie. There you go. That's all I wanted to add. Okay.
All right, Mike. Well, I guess we're about to go to break, but if you could, in 10 seconds, describe to me your feelings on Guilty Gear Strive.
Oh, God. No, thanks for being on here, Mike. We'll talk to... No, I was kidding.
Yeah.
It's pretty.
It's pretty. It's pretty. Okay. Okay, there you go.
All right. Crack my own self up. Well,
They're doing a GGPO caster for Exit Core. Those are my feelings.
yeah. All right, buddy. Well, thanks a lot for coming on. Really appreciate it.
Yeah,
Thank you.
Thank you.
If you ever want to have me back when it's another slow news day, let me know.
Dude, I mean, honestly, I may just have you back so we can just talk programming fighting games one of these days, to be honest. Just because that part I'm super interested in. I want to know, like, as much about it as I can, you know, without giving away trade secrets or whatever like that. So
There really aren't any.
Okay.
A lot of the actual fighting game part is how you do the design on your end when you iterate. Like, the actual building of an engine is like, everybody ought to be able to figure out how to do that by now. Also, I guess I should say, I'm very much about freely sharing information in the first place, because my belief is I should tell everybody how to do everything, because then everything gets better, and because nobody's going to do it as good as me anyway.
Right? Feeling.
I love it. I love it.
But like, for real, for the netcode thing, right? I would like every game to have rollback netcode that now works the way that Skullgirls does, because then anyone who wants to play any fighting game online can go and do it, instead of being like, well, I really wanted to play Exerd online, or I really wanted to play Unist online, but I can't with anyone with any kind of good connection. So instead, I'm going to have to play this other game, Skullgirls or whatever, that I don't like. Is like, my goal is not to force you to play the game that I made if you don't like it. My goal is for people to be able to play fighting games online, because the more people that play them, the more people that like them.
Yeah.
Right? You shouldn't, I mean, before SG, like, the choice was 3 SOE if you wanted rollbacks, and if you hated Third Strike, like, that was it, right? Now your choice of the mainstream fighting games, if you want to play somebody that's any kind of reasonable distance from you, is Street Fighter V.
Right.
And like, no, I wouldn't wish that on anyone.
I mean, honestly, this is a very fighting game player mindset. You know, you teach your opponents how to beat you, because in the end, that's going to make you a better player in the end anyway. Yep. So
makes sense.
Do you save that as, I don't know what PG-13 level you're at, but
go to the max, buddy.
If you save that shit for nationals,
yep.
If someone has a counter for it, you never got to practice against the counter, right?
Yep.
Right.
Exactly. I mean, it was...
Hey, thanks a lot for coming on again.
Okay. I'll shut up.
Case missed.
Thank you, Mike, for coming on.
Anything you want to plug before you get out of here?
Yes, actually. Okay. In addition to trying the Skullgirls Netcode patch, you should really try Them's Fightin' Herds, because the story mode is fantastic.
I just downloaded it earlier today.
Cool.
I'm about to do that.
Like, I'm legitimately impressed by both pixel lobbies and story mode and the salt mines. The fact that they did it with the engine that we gave them is even more impressive. But, like, overall, like, they're really, really good. So please give it a shot.
I definitely will.
All right.
All right, man.
All right. Good night.
Have a good night.
All right. Well, I guess then we are...
I can talk, huh?